Welcome to Drew's Storytime. If you enjoy falling asleep here, you're very welcome to subscribe for more gentle stories and peaceful meditations. Whether you're sitting or lying down, just allow yourself to get comfortable and let tonight's story carry you gently into rest. Tonight's story is The River That Kept Moving. The river did not announce the evening. It simply continued, the water moving at the same unhurried pace it had held all day, carrying light and shadow together without distinction. Andrew stood on the bank with his boots planted in damp earth, the smell of riverweed and silt rising softly around him. The sky had begun to dim, not abruptly, but in layers that thinned the light until it felt less directional, less insistent. He checked the line without urgency. The rod rested easily in his hands, familiar enough that he did not need to look at it. The reel sat quiet, its metal cool against his palm. Fishing at this hour was never about catching much. Andrew came in the evenings because the river changed then, not in shape, but in temperament. He cast once, gently. The line traced a smooth arc before settling into the water with barely a sound. Small ripples spread outward and dissolved into the current almost immediately. The river accepted the interruption without comment, closing over it as though nothing had happened. Andrew shifted his weight and waited. The bank here curved slightly, creating a slower eddy near the edge, where leaves and pale fragments of foam collected before being pulled back into the main flow. The water reflected the sky in broken strips, colors stretched and softened by movement. What might have been clear earlier now felt layered, as if the river were holding more than one moment at once. He had fished this stretch for years, long enough to stop measuring success by what came out of the water. Some evenings brought a quiet tug on the line. Others brought nothing at all. Andrew had learned that the river offered time more reliably than fish, and that time, when taken properly, asked for very little in return. A bird moved along the far bank, its shape briefly visible before dissolving into shadow. Andrew watched without following it. The sound of wings faded quickly, absorbed by the wider hush of dusk. The river carried on, its surface darkening as the sky above it lost definition. He felt the day loosen its hold. Earlier hours had been filled with the usual accumulation of small demands, conversations that required attention, tasks that needed finishing, decisions that asked to be made before they could be set down. Standing here, none of that pressed forward. The river did not invite urgency. It did not respond to it. Andrew adjusted the line slightly and let it settle again. The current tugged gently, not enough to pull, just enough to remain present. He watched the place where the line entered the water, noticing how the surface bent around it, reshaping itself continuously without effort. The light changed again. The sky's reflection thinned, leaving the water darker, more opaque. Small points of brightness appeared where the current caught the last of the light, then disappeared as quickly as they formed. The movement felt endless, but not repetitive. Each moment distinct without asking to be marked. Andrew breathed slowly. The rhythm matched the river more than his own body. Inhale, exhale. The water moved on. The alignment required no concentration. It happened because nothing interfered. He remembered evenings when he had tried to control the experience, when he had cast too often, adjusted too much, watched the line too closely. Those evenings had passed quickly. full of activity, but thin in memory. Over time, he had learned to let the river set the pace instead. A faint tug passed through the line. Not a bite, just the current shifting slightly as something unseen moved beneath the surface. Andrew did not react. The line settled again, the rod steady in his hands. The river resumed its quiet conversation with itself. He noticed how the sounds around him softened further. The distant road faded into insignificance. The breeze, barely present now, moved through reeds at the edge of the bank with a low brushing sound. Somewhere upstream, water met stone with a steady murmur that did not change pitch or rhythm. Andrew felt no need to look at the time. Dusk held its own measure. The evening progressed without reference to minutes or hours, marked instead by the gradual deepening of colour and the cooling of air against his face. The river reflected the change faithfully, neither speeding it along nor resisting it. He shifted his stance slightly and continued to wait. The act of fishing became secondary to the act of standing there, present and unrequired. The river did not reward patience with spectacle. It rewarded it with continuity. The water kept moving. Andrew remained. The light continued to thin. It did not fade all at once. It loosened, easing itself out of colour and definition, until the river seemed to hold more shadow than reflection. Andrew stood where he was, boots firm on the bank, feeling the ground cool through the soles. The smell of damp earth deepened as the air shifted, carrying the quiet after-rain scent that lingered long after water had finished falling. He watched the line without fixing on it. The river tugged gently, not in a way that suggested fish, but in the steady language of current meeting resistance. The rod responded with a soft bend that straightened again as the water moved on. Andrew adjusted nothing. The river had its own rhythm tonight, and he had learned that listening mattered more than correcting. Upstream, the surface caught a last thin band of light. It fractured across the current, breaking into short, wavering lines that slid apart as quickly as they formed. The pattern repeated without repeating itself, each moment familiar, yet unrecordable. Andrew felt the quiet satisfaction of watching something complete itself without needing an audience. A breeze moved through the reeds behind him. It was brief, just enough to lift their tips and release a dry, whispering sound before settling again. The river answered with a slight change in texture, small ripples travelling diagonally across the surface before dissolving into the wider flow. Andrew shifted his stance and rested more weight on his back foot. The movement felt deliberate and unhurried, part of the same long adjustment the evening was making. He became aware of how still his hands were on the rod, how little effort it took to remain present when nothing demanded response. He thought, briefly, of earlier years on this river, of mornings that began before dawn, when mist clung low and the water carried a chill that reached bone deep, of afternoons spent watching the surface for signs, reading patterns with a concentration that bordered on hunger. Those hours had been full of expectation. Each cast had carried a question. This evening carried none. The river did not present itself as a challenge to be solved. It offered continuity instead, a sense that things could move forward without needing his participation. Andrew felt no loss in that. The absence of expectation did not thin the experience. It widened it. The line dipped slightly, then rose again. Not a strike, not even close. Just the current shifting around something unseen beneath the surface. Andrew watched the motion complete itself and felt a small release in his shoulders. The river had acknowledged his presence and continued without pause. Dusk settled more fully now. The far bank became less distinct. Its outline softened until trees and earth blended into a single dark mass. The sky above held a dull, even grey that gradually deepened toward blue. The water mirrored the change, its surface losing detail and gaining depth. Andrew listened. The sounds that remained were few and well-spaced. Water moving past stone, the occasional brush of reeds, a distant call from somewhere upstream that did not repeat. Each sound arrived, existed, and passed on without overlap. He became aware of his own breathing again, not because it demanded attention, but because it matched the space so well. Inhale, exhale. The river moved on. The alignment felt unremarkable and complete. Time passed without marking itself. Andrew did not check a watch. He could not have said how long he had been standing there. The evening did not ask to be measured. It shaped itself through gradual change rather than sequence. The water continued to carry things past him, small leaves, pale fragments of foam, occasional darker shapes that slipped beneath the surface and vanished. Each object followed its own path, influenced by eddies and currents invisible from above. The river made room for all of it without slowing. Andrew felt the quiet acceptance of that movement settle into him, not as a lesson or a metaphor, but as an observed fact. The river did not discriminate between what it carried. It held everything briefly, then released it without asking for anything more. He adjusted the line once more, lifting it just enough to reposition the lure before letting it sink again. The movement was smooth, practiced, free of urgency. The water closed over the disturbance immediately, restoring its surface as though nothing had changed. The sky darkened another degree. Lights appeared faintly along the far road, their reflections stretching thin and wavering across the water before breaking apart. The river accepted them without holding on, carrying each glimmer downstream until it disappeared. Andrew stood within that quiet exchange. The evening continued to move around him, reshaping itself without interruption. The river flowed on, unchanged by his presence, yet open to it all the same. The night began to gather itself. It did not arrive suddenly or complete itself all at once. It assembled gradually, deepening the air and narrowing what could be seen until the river became less a surface and more a presence. Andrew noticed the shift not through sight, but through temperature, the cool settling more firmly against his face and hands. He loosened his grip on the rod slightly. The line continued to rest in the water, responsive to the current rather than any pull beneath it. The river's movement felt steadier now, its voice lower, less textured. Where earlier the surface had offered small variations, it now held a broader consistency, a flow that did not draw attention to itself. Andrew stood quietly and listened. The sounds of the evening had thinned further. The distant road was no longer audible. The reeds along the bank moved only when the water brushed against them from below. Somewhere farther downstream, water met stone with a sound so even it felt less like noise and more like continuity. He became aware of the weight of the rod in his hands. Not heavy, but present, its balance familiar from years of use. Fishing had taught him how to feel without reacting, how to remain responsive without anticipation. Those habits did not leave him when the fish failed to appear. They stayed, shaping how he stood, how he waited. A faint pull travelled through the line. This time, it lingered just long enough to be noticed before releasing. Andrew lifted the rod gently, not to strike, but to free the line from the current's grip. The motion was smooth and restrained. The lure broke the surface briefly, sending out a small ring that widened, then disappeared into the dark. He reeled in slowly. The sound was soft and controlled, or a steady whisper of movement that matched the river rather than cutting across it. When the line was clear, he rested the rod against his shoulder and looked out across the water one last time. The river did not look back. It moved on as it always had, carrying the night with it, holding and releasing without pause. The surface no longer reflected light clearly. It absorbed it, turning glimmers into depth rather than image. Andrew stepped away from the bank. The ground rose gently beneath his feet as he moved toward the path, the damp earth firming where grass took hold. Each step felt grounded, unremarkable, complete. He did not hurry. The river would continue without him. There was no need to mark the leaving. At the top of the bank, he paused, not to look back, but to adjust his footing, to let the shift from water to land finish settling. The sounds behind him remained steady, unchanged by distance. The river's movement carried on, audible, but no longer central. Andrew continued up the path. The rod rested lightly against his shoulder, the line secure, its work finished for the evening. Ahead, the faint outline of the road emerged through the trees, marked by a single lamp that cast a soft, contained circle of light. The night had fully taken its place now. The river flowed on beneath it, uninterrupted. Andrew walked away, carrying nothing from the water except the quiet steadiness that came from standing long enough to let movement pass through without needing to follow it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for supporting the channel